Good morning. The Public Service Commission will come to order. We have a full docket and a full room today, so let's get started. I have a few personnel announcements to make. We have a big loss to the agency as we have an upcoming retirement. Judge Janice Flynn, who is somewhere in the audience. Janice, if you could stand in the back row, hiding out back there. She has decided to retire from the PSC after 27 years of service. The bulk of her tenure was spent in the Office of Staff Counsel, where she worked on numerous cases, including rate cases, cases involving transportation, and some of our thornier rulemakings. Probably over 100 major proceedings Janice has worked in on her career. In 2018, she was promoted to be one of our 4 public utility law judges, where she's handled a number of rate cases in her time there. We appreciate your service, Judge Flynn, and she'll have some more time to spend with her 2 children, both Terps. One's currently a student at University of Maryland, one's a recent graduate, and she's a graduate of College Park as well. Judge Flynn, thank you for your service. We appreciate all you've done for this agency, and I recently had the chance to visit with her, where she's provided me with some additional recommendations for improvement, and that just goes to show you her level of commitment to this agency and even wanting to make it better on her way out of the building. So thank you, Judge Flynn. While our folks here are hard workers, and it's not uncommon to walk the halls late at night, and I saw one of our staff counsel, Annette Garofalo, pounding away at the keyboard at 8 p.m. I'm glad that our folks here also enjoy their off time. My right-hand man and assistant, Loretta Schofield, ably assists me and gets me ready for all these meetings and makes sure I'm in the right place at the right time. But she's also had a very special interest in her life, and that's the Wheel of Fortune. Recently, she was selected to be a participant in that game show, and she flew out to California. And she's not one who takes a lot of vacations or time off, but I'm happy to announce that she will be participating on Wheel of Fortune tonight. So you could see her on either Fox or NBC, and depending on what territory you live in. And if she doesn't come to work tomorrow, she's probably on a slow boat to Fiji. But none of us know whether or not she was the winner or second place or whatnot, so you'll have to tune in to see that. Before we get started with our agenda, I'd like to just announce that on Monday, we publicly released a new website that shows more data transparency with respect to our retail suppliers, both electric and gas. Retail supply issues have received a lot of attention lately, and rightfully so. I discussed these issues at our last meeting a week ago today. What you'll see on our website now is information regarding suppliers who have received at least 3 complaints in a given month. And if those 3 complaints are logged and vetted through our Consumer Affairs Division, they will be put on this transparent spreadsheet, which we will upload every quarter. You'll be able to determine the type of complaint and how the complaint was adjudicated, whether it was in favor of the consumer or the company. So I think that goes to show how interested the PSC is in adjudicating these complaints and providing additional transparency. We talked last week about the materials that you get in the mail. Just wanted to share 2 that I've recently received, one for electric service and one for gas service. We talked about variable rates and the fact that they could be relatively tricky for customers that are not familiar with the commodity, buying the commodity, and keeping an eye on the rates. This one offer has airline miles associated with it, but it doesn't have an upper limit on the rate they could charge. So they could potentially charge $100 per kilowatt hour, although you do get 10% off your monthly rate for the first 3 months, which is 6-7 cents per kWh. But I thoroughly scrubbed all the fine print, and it's all there. So I remind consumers to read the fine print when choosing a retail supplier. The gas item was a little more trickier, perhaps misleading, because in their return address, instead of saying their name, they say Washington Gas Customers. I don't like that, but somebody signed their name at the bottom, James Neal, General Manager of Dominion. and we'll be reaching out to him on that. That said, this is a fixed offer for gas, and you can lock in for 1, 2, or 3 years, no termination fee. So for some customers, despite the fact that they may think this is from Washington Gas, seems like a pretty competitive deal. As noted previously, the Commission will be announcing a new website early in the first quarter of next year, which will allow both electricity and natural gas shoppers to better compare the options in the marketplace. So stay tuned. We'll have more time set aside to discuss retail supply issues in future administrative meetings. That said, without further ado, we will approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was a week ago today. If the commissioners have had a chance to review those minutes from December the 11th and are in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The minutes from the December 11th, 2019 meeting are approved. Mr. Secretary, the consent agenda.
Before we get, Mr. Chairman, we're on the administrative agenda. We're going to withdraw and not consider the last item, which is item number 28, Columbia Gas of Maryland's filing on today's meeting.
Thank you. Item 28 is struck. The parties need not be present.
We have 9 items on the consent agenda this morning. Item number 1 is Matrix Telecom et al. It's a filing of a notice of a company name changed at a DBA. Item 2 is Metropolitan Telecommunications of Maryland, Inc. filed a notice of an intent to de-tariff. Items 3 and 4 are filings from Dennis Adams and Robert Borkowski. Their applications for certification as a geothermal heating and cooling renewable energy facilities. Item 5 through 7 are filings from Nordic Energy Services, LLC, Utility Management Services, Inc., and Recurrent Innovative Solutions, LLC. Their applications to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in the case of Nordic, and then in Utility and Recurrent, their applications for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in Maryland. Item 8 is Washington International Insurance Company filed a notice of cancellation of a bond for North Shore Energy Consulting, LLC. And then item 9 is Gira Energy, LLC, Energy.me, Midwest, LLC, Constellation New Energy, Inc., and Constellation New Energy Gas Division, LLC, filed a notice of customer contract assignment.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions on the consent items? Seeing none, are there motions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 1, I move that we note the company's name change and direct the company to file a revision to its access tariff within 30 days of this administrative meeting. For item number 2, I move that we permit the company to de-tariff with an effective date of December 31st, 2019. For items number 3 and 4, I move that we approve the applications and issue renewable energy facility certification numbers with the energy savings estimates, direct the applicants to establish REC accounts with PJM GATS within 30 days of certification, and file geothermal and thermal biomass generation reports with the Commission within 1 week of each recording of generation data with GATS of RECs were created, and direct the applicants to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any change to the information in the applications. For item number 5, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as a natural gas supplier in Maryland for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. For items number 6 and 7, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff, direct the company to provide training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. For item number 8, I move that we cancel North Shore Energy Consulting, LLC's energy license. And finally, for item number 9, I move that we note the filing.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motions are approved.
Mr. Chairman, first item on the administrative agenda, item number 10 is Grid Gear Solutions Limited, filed a request for electric sub-meter approval.
Thank you. And if counsel for any of the called items are present, please approach the podium to your right. Mr. Greger.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. James Greger on behalf of staff. This item concerns a request by Grid Gear Solutions Limited filed on February 27, 2019, for approval of a GG model solid-state electric meter manufactured by Grid Gear for electric submetering applications. Public Utilities Article Section 7-301A requires a person to gain commission authorization before use of a gas or electric meter, and PUA Section 7-303D4I and II state that all submeter equipment is subject to any regulations and standards adopted by the Commission for accuracy, testing, and record keeping of a gas or electric company meter. COMAR 20.25.01.04a further requires that 1. All submeters installed in compliance with these regulations be of a type and class to properly and accurately register electrical consumption. 2. The meter type and design shall meet the applicable provisions of the latest edition of the American National Standard for Electric Meters, Code for Electric Metering, the ANSI C12 standards. And 3. That any submeter installed for billing purposes be approved by the Commission. In the present filing, Grid Gear has provided documentation that this meter has been tested and conforms to all applicable ANSI C12 standards for electric meters as required by COMAR. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission approve Grid Gear's request to approve the GG model solid-state energy meter manufactured by Grid Gear for electric submetering applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregor. Mr. Spiegelman, do commissioners have questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the company's request to approve the GG model solid-state energy meter manufactured by Grid Gear for electric submetering applications.
All in favor? Aye. Motion is approved. Thank you.
Next item, item 11, is Cypress Creek Renewables LLC filed a request for an extension of an operational deadline for its community solar pilot program project number 4705564 in Baltimore County.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. Cypress Creek Renewables LLC is seeking a waiver of the operational deadline established under COMAR 20-620304C, which, if granted, would extend applicant's deadline from January 13th, 2020 to May 13th, 2020. As good cause, which is required under COMAR 20-620104 for the granting of this waiver. Applicant cites delays in obtaining permits that would enable applicant to timely commence construction. This request follows a delay which, due to a pending legal challenge, allowed applicant a day-for-day extension under COMAR 20-620304C. Applicant's operational deadline period, including the day-for-day extension period, will expire January 13th, 2020. Cypress Creek has made progress toward permitting by placing its stormwater management plans and final landscape plans before the appropriate county agencies. However, permitting is not complete. It would appear that construction cannot begin until after the completion of permitting. Under COMAR 20-620104, the Commission may waive a regulation in COMAR 2062 for good cause shown. The information provided in applicant's November 18, 2019 letter indicates that applicant requires both permitting and construction prior to beginning operations. Staff recommends the applicant's operational deadline be extended as requested to May 13th, 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Garofalo. Counsel for Cypress Creek Renewables.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, and thank you, Ms. Garofalo. I'm Christopher Mudd with Venable here on behalf of Cypress Creek. I've appeared before the Commission before with this particular project as we've been under appeal, and as Ms. Garofalo stated, I don't need to regurgitate what she talked about in the way of history, or the way of our request. The only thing I would mention is I think the Commission's been very consistent with its desire to have these projects move forward, as well as giving the required amount of time for the permitting, understanding that you're not giving extensive extensions because you don't want to give us an opportunity to dawdle, so to speak. And in this particular instance, we have made submissions for permitting. We're in the process of dealing with county agencies on stormwater management. Typically, the lead times for stormwater management design, as well as dealing with a fire marshal to figure out exactly what materials should be placed under the installation. Those project. So for all those reasons, we are requesting that the commission see fit to waive the operational deadline start to May. It's possible that we'll be back here again, but we're hopeful that between now and May 13th, we'll be able to get the permits in hand and commence construction.
Thank you, Mr. Mott. Is this the second waiver or first?
I don't know if the first waiver that we had, or the first relief that we had was
Wasn't- no, that was not.
a determination that we were under legal challenge.
Right. So this is the first waiver.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner Herman?
Mr. Mudd, how many months has it been since you, trying to understand, how
Began
long,
permitting.
yes, how
So-
long, where are we on that?
So, we were under appeal until, before, we had an approval before the administrative law judge in Baltimore County. That was appealed to the Board of Appeals.
I want to go back before that,
Okay.
right? You had to get authority from the commission to be a CSEG, right?
This is a community solar program application. So,
Right.
an application was filed by my client. I was actually not involved in that process.
Uh-huh.
They got into the queue.
Yeah, when did they get into the queue? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Unfortunately, I don't have that information. I think it would have been 2018 at this point. So I think they're in
2018,
the
right.
second.
I'm just trying to
That.
count, how many months are we from when you got in the queue to when you expect to be operational?
I think it's going to be about 2 years from that particular.
You think it's
time.
going to be about 24 months?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm just trying to understand,
Well,
the timeframes here.
and I understand that the commission may be soon taking up a request to try and recognize that the permitting process for all of these types of projects is taking longer than was anticipated when the regulation was put in place.
Right.
And I think we're kind of, I think we're kind of proof positive of that. Some projects don't undergo a legal challenge and they're able to get off the ground pretty quickly. But in this particular one, we had appeals, and now we're dealing with the local jurisdiction on the permitting side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the commission grant Cypress Creek Renewables LLC a time-limited waiver of COMAR 20.62.03.04C2, extending applicant's operation deadline to May 13th, 2020.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can call the next two items together, items 12 and 13. They're filings from Delmarva Power and Light Company and Potomac Electric Power Company, their revised tariff pages, proposing changes to the opt-out fee section of their respective schedules.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Anna Joy Thompson on behalf of staff. On July 25th, 2019, Pepco and Delmarva, the PHI companies, filed revised tariff pages such that the companies will no longer provide ERT or AMR meters to customers who chose to opt out of having an AMI meter. Instead, the opt-out customers would receive a solid-state meter that is not equipped with communications devices. In addition, the revisions will allow the companies to disenroll a customer from opt-out service and install an AMI meter at the premises if there is evidence that the customer has tampered with or damaged the meter. Because the Commission has twice required that the companies use ERT meters, and since the companies have not supported their request with substantial evidence, staff recommends that the Commission reject the proposed tariff changes that would allow the companies to use solid-state meters instead of ERT meters. Staff does recommend that the Commission accept the proposed tariff changes, allowing for the disenrollment of a customer from the opt-out program if it is evident that the customer has tampered with or damaged their meter. The Commission has previously granted this authority to Baltimore Gas and Electric. While reviewing PHI's filings and responses to data requests, it became apparent that both Pepco and Delmarva have been installing solid-state meters instead of ERT AMR meters since 2014, which is a violation of their tariffs and Commission orders. Due to these violations, staff recommends that the Commission issue a show cause order to both companies. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission deny the proposed tariff revision to the opt-out fee section of Pepco's Schedules R and GS and Delmarva's Schedules R and SGSS, and accept the tariff revisions to Pepco's General Terms and Conditions and Delmarva's Rules and Regulations. Additionally, staff recommends that the Commission issue a show cause order to determine 1, whether Pepco and Delmarva should pay a civil penalty for violating their tariff and a Commission order, 2, if so, what the appropriate amount for the civil penalty should be, and 3, whether Pepco and Delmarva should replace the installed solid-state meters with ERT meters at cost to the company. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Would Office of People's Counsel like to provide any additional comments beyond what was filed on December 16th?
No, Your Honor. William Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. We don't have anything addition to the letter.
Okay.
And would just be repetitive of staff's analysis, which we thought was excellent. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. Counsel for PHI, I recognize that you filed a response on December 16th. The 17th, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, the PHI companies are not in violation of any commission orders. When you look at the history of this attached with the orders, you had an interim opt-out order issued by this commission on May 25th, 2012 that indicated that customers could maintain and should maintain their legacy meters. For Pepco and Delmarva Power, those were either solid-state meters or analog meters. Subsequently, and these are attached to my letter, the Commission issued Order 85294 on July 7th, 2013, allowing customers as a matter of public right to opt out, and again affirming that those customers should keep their legacy meters. Finally, on February 26, 2014, the Commission issued Order 86200 that set the opt-out fees and the schedules. If you look at the ordering paragraph number 1 of that order, as I set out in my letter, it says that utilities shall offer their residential customers and commercial customers the option of retaining their legacy meters. There is a footnote drop there that says the utilities may install ERT AMR meters in lieu of a smart meter. When you look at the order at page 16, it says, with the exception of MEA, the parties agree that the commission is to allow the opt-out option. It should take the form of allowing customers to retain their existing meters. However, both SMECO and Pepco recommended that the ERT meter should be installed in lieu of a smart meter if the customer's existing meter is only an analog or a hard-to-access premise meter. The commission, via its orders, clearly said that we should allow the customers to keep their legacy meter. Here's the problem that occurred in this case, and it's my fault. When we filed our compliance tariffs, they were not correct. They did not recognize ordering paragraph number 1 in 86200 that allowed customers to keep their legacy meters. Instead, we put in the word shall use an ERT meter. Our meter folks were made aware all along with these orders that they could not put in AMI meters for opt-out customers, that they had to keep their legacy meters. And that's where the problem occurs here. It's nothing to do with our meters department. They follow these commission orders time and time again. I would say this, it wasn't until the commission's letter order in the Garrick matter, unfortunately, that I recognized this error in interpretation, because we'd had previous letter orders where we had made it clear to all of the parties that we were not putting in ERT meters. I'm thinking specifically of the Volmer matter and the Paskalev matter and other complaints. It wasn't until the Garrick order came out in July that I went back and looked and realized that our tariff was wrong and was not in compliance with this commission's order in 86200. And that's why we're here today.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. So, in effect, what you're saying is that when you complied with 86200, you imposed upon your utility the shall requirement.
Yes, and it's personally and professionally embarrassing to me because I was responsible for that.
We appreciate your sharing that with us today.
Might I respond for just on just one point, Mr.
Staff
Chairman?
counsel, yes, I'd like you to respond on all the points if you can.
Well, really, I don't think there's a lot of dispute here on most of the facts, but specifically, Mr. Michael's reading of Order 86200 is a little bit problematic, or not quite covering the whole situation. What the language there says that customers may keep their legacy meters, or the utility may install an ERT AMR meter. And that essentially gives you two options. What it doesn't do is give you a third option to install a new solid state meter, and that is what, and it is our understanding that the company has done that on numerous occasions since that order was passed. So, and that is neither retaining a legacy meter nor installing an ERT AMR meter, and that's where we see the violation of the commission order.
So let me respond to that. We have very few opt-out customers. There is confusion in the customer base of what meter is an opt-out meter, what meter is an ERT meter. And so my meter shop, on their own initiative, plus some of these meters, these analog meters and other meters, needed to be changed out because they're getting old, went ahead and got an Alcatel meter with a Maryland flag on the meter pan, so you could view the Maryland flag, so that our customers would be assured that the meter was an opt-out meter with no RF communication, which is generally what, and I didn't they're right, that's what it says, they can keep the analog meter or whatever meter, but we need to systematically change out meters as they get older. The key thing here is that our customers that opted out, I think it's 1,024 for Delmarva and 1,200 for Pepco, they don't want the radio frequency, they don't want the RF. We're trying to be customer friendly here, and we have a very small number of opt-out customers. And contrary to what staff says about the costs, I do not believe that the costs of the ERT meters are more cost beneficial than what we're doing.
Well, your answer says they're about the same price, maybe
Yeah.
less. Now, Steph, Mr. Spivak, what is the big deal with respect to solid state versus ERT? Is it just a matter of cost? I know we have a long and tortured 8-year history regarding these meter replacements.
If I may, I would like to add some comments on how the language ended up in PHI's tariffs concerning the ERT meters. So after it was decided that there should be an opt-out option, the utilities who have opt-out customers filed tariff language, and then the Office of People's Counsel submitted a letter requesting that the tariff language be similar across all of the utilities. And so in an admin meeting, I believe July of 2014, all the utilities sat down with the commission, and it was like during the meeting they specifically decided how the language in their tariffs was going to read. And so that language was specifically put in there, reading ERT AMR meters shall be used, as requested by OPC and then affirmed by the commission.
Mr. McKeel?
That's not my recollection of what happened, but I did not go back and look at it. I've been involved in all of these. I wouldn't believe that the Office of People's Counsel would recommend that a meter that gives off RF for their customers that don't like RF. And I would just point to the commission's order, the second commission order on opt-out.
Is this 86-200?
No, sir. It is the second commission order on opt-out. It is attachments. It's order 85-294. It is attached as attachment 2. When you look on page 7 of the order, this commission says, although we have not found convincing evidence that smart meters pose any health risk to the public at large, we acknowledge the good faith belief on the part of some ratepayers to the contrary. If we ultimately decide to allow customers to retain their analog meter, this option will address any health concerns raised by the use of smart meters. And so it seems antithetical to me that with that language, the commission would require the RF usage. And I can tell the commission, if we are to put on ERT meters, that the complaint shop should be ready for a large number of complaints.
So far, you only have a few dozen ERT meters.
That's correct, and
In the field.
I could pass around our filing in 9207. I did not include it, but in our filing on opt-out, we recommended the meter would, additionally, the companies would receive the right to install an ERT meter on hard-to-access premises to facilitate manual meter reading. This process is consistent with PHI's current business practice. So,
Because the ERT
our
meters,
recommendation for ERT meters, Your Honor, was an ERT meter for hard to access. And again, and I can give, it's an April 25th, 2013 filing. I have enough copies if the commission wants it. It's item 269 in the case jacket. And that's why, I should have caught this when we had the initial tariff here.
thank you, Mr. Michael. Back to staff, my earlier question has not been answered. Setting aside the tariff, what is the objection to having a non-ERT meter installed in a property? Is it a matter of cost? Or is it there's some other public policy reason why the commission staff does not want solid state meters installed?
When the commission initially chose the ERT AMR meters, they did so because of the reading capabilities, and I believe as a result of that, the costs were thought to be lower. And so with the ERT meters, you can read them from a distance. You don't have to get out of the vehicle. And according to a DR response from the companies, they can be read from up to 1/10 of a mile away, as opposed to the solid state meters where you have to park the vehicle, get out of the vehicle, walk to the meter and manually type in the number and then double check the accuracy and then return to the vehicle or to the next meter. So you're looking at a potentially substantial time difference there, which results in increased costs.
Mr. Michael?
We answered a data request. First of all, we use an Itron P4 handheld meter reading system, and that meter reading system either reads the ERT meter or the analog meter or the digital meter that we have. I attached to my letter, they asked how long it takes. For the ERT meter, it's 3 minutes to 108, or 3 seconds to 180 seconds to read an ERT meter with the handheld system, and it's 15 seconds to 180 seconds to read the solid state or analog meter. So there's not a considerable amount of difference. The cost of an analog or solid state meter is $52. The cost of the ERT meter is $71. So there's a delta there also. Also, we provided evidence that our meter reading contract, it's the same cost whether or not we're reading a solid state meter or an ERT meter per hour, per read.
Thank you. Back to staff. I just want to be clear. Is there anything beyond cost, which is a factor in your determination that we stay with the ERT meter decision? Or is cost the primary driver?
You were basing it off of the commission order, which specified cost.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Other commissioners? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Michael, you're generally aware of how we handle appeals of complaints that come into our Consumer Affairs Division and the letter orders that result in that process, and I'm sure that you generally monitor
Yes, sir.
those orders that when they come out. I've been on, and we impanel that. We have a 3-commissioner panel. I've been on that panel for about 3 years now, or close to it, I think. And you're aware that we've issued lots of orders that appealed exactly this case in point.
Yes, and I've defended those orders and won in the circuit court on every occasion.
And to my recollection, most of those orders have said you either got to take the AMI, or if you opt out, you got to get the ERT, or you got to pay to move the meter somewhere away from your premises.
That is not my recollection of those orders. The only letter order that I'm aware that said that, which caused me to look back at this, was the Garrick letter order. The other 2 letter orders that I am aware of, the Paskalev letter order and the Volmer letter order, did not say that.
Because I seem to recall a lot of discussion in many of our orders along these lines talked about the relative RF frequency emanating from an ERT as opposed to an AMI, and being much less, and why we have made determination that the AMI isn't a concern, but the ERT is even of less concern, and use that as justification for people who complained about various health conditions and health needs, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, so that, I think perhaps you're thinking about orders in BG&E, and the reason that's significant is before we did the AMI rollout at PHI, we did not have the ERT meters installed. We did not have an ERT meter solution. It's my understanding that Baltimore Gas and Electric, before they moved to the AMI meter, they had installed ERT meters throughout their territory. So the ERT meter for Baltimore Gas and Electric would be the legacy meter.
Yeah, but you've been going forward even after your tariff said you shall use an ERT. You've been replacing with solid state meters, and that's not a legacy meter at that point. That's a replacement.
That's correct, Your Honor. And I acknowledge in my letter that we were not in compliance with our tariff. And I was not aware of that. And I also acknowledge that the tariff should not have been drafted like that, and that's on me.
Wasn't the original discussions of cost important, and we wanted consistency across the state because we wanted the opt-out to be as cost-effective as possible? And I know you said the costs of the meters are the same, but I think staff is saying, and I think the record in order number 86200 is very clear that we were concerned about costs with regard to the opt-out program, and that having a consistent, easy-to-read, semi-remote drive-by kind of capability was important to keeping costs down across the state where AMI was deployed.
I respectfully don't read that order the same way, Your Honor. And ordering paragraph number 1 says that, you know, we have to offer retaining the legacy meter. And when you look at the discussion of the costs there, it says may, it doesn't say must.
I understand it says may, but it also is pretty prescriptive. Can I direct you to page 17 of that order?
Yes, sir.
At the top?
Yes, sir.
The very first full sentence says, however, we have also charged the utilities with providing cost-effective service. And so we find that the installation of an ERT meter in lieu of a smart meter will at least permit monthly data retrieval in the form of a meter reading driveway. Wasn't that all kind of the cost argument?
It was. There was no cost, as I note in my letter, there were no cost studies provided in case number 86200 or in the 9207 about the costs of ERT meters and whether or not they're more cost effective. And the point I'm making here is our reading of the solid state meters for the 1,000 customers that we have is just as cost effective, if not more, than using ERT meters.
I don't read 86200 that way, so anyway, thank you. I appreciate your answers.
If I might, I would just like to add, one of the issues we had here was that there's no cost study here either that demonstrates clearly that one is more or less costly. And without that kind of evidence, we were very reluctant to simply go along with what the company wanted to do.
Can I follow up with you on that? Didn't other utilities make their argument in 86200 in that proceeding that the ERT was the more cost-effective replacement for opt-out?
I think they did. In fact, I think Pepco and Delmarva may have made that argument themselves.
They're quoted in 86200 saying it themselves.
I disagree with that. I read the language of our filing, and the order on page 16 says that the parties agree that if the commission is to allow opt-out, it should take the form of allowing customers to retain their existing meters. And then it says, however, both SMECO and Pepco recommended that ERT meters should be installed in lieu of smart meters if the customer's existing meter is analog or located in a hard-to-access premise.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Richard.
I just want to continue to follow up a little bit with Commissioner O'Donnell's questions. I think the request before us today is whether or not we're going to approve the tariff change that would allow, explicitly allow the tariff to replace with non-RF meters. But as Commissioner O'Donnell pointed out, and he pointed it on page 17, but there are a couple of other places on page 22. The commission, when it issued this order, it was under the thinking that there would be an optimization, there would be a savings in costs, and that is what is why I think they, at the time, they issued the order for an ERT type of meter. So has there been, other than just the data responses on the time it takes to read the meter, I mean, has there been any other further analysis, or is it just really an analysis done kind of on the back of the envelope
Well,
for this particular
We
issue
provided
today?
analysis about the time it would take to read the meters, and as I noted in my letter, for the solid state meters, it takes anywhere from 15 seconds to 180 seconds. For the ERT meters, it takes anywhere from 3 seconds to 180 seconds. At Pepco, we have a contract in place with the contractor that does all this, and the costs are the same whether or not they're reading a solid state meter or whether or not they're reading an ERT meter. At Delmarva, we still have some meter readers, and we provided the costs for that. I mean, and keep in mind that we have 1,024, or roughly 1,024. I could look in my letter. I gave the exact numbers, and for like buying a van and doing all that, that wasn't our solution anyway. We always used handheld ERT meter readers. We just don't have that kind of opt-out numbers.
Okay, and I would note that Pepco has done a very good job, or PHI, good job in keeping the opt-out rates low in your service territories. Let me ask staff, so is it correct that really the only rationale in 86200 for requiring the ERT meter or the RF meter was based on costs? Is that essentially, because I looked through the order and it appears that is the reason.
So both cost and access were taken into account when making that decision.
Cost and access, okay. All right, and so, and would you agree that one of the reasons people opt out, one of the I guess the major reasons people opt out is the concern over health effects? It is the radio frequency concern. Is that what staff has found when you've reviewed all the various complaints or the requests for opt-out?
So we were only directed towards 3 complaints, so I'm not sure that is a great sample pool. It would appear that RF is a concern. However, when it comes to the difference between the ERT and the solid state meters, only one of the 3 complaints that we were able to access and were directed towards by the company concerned the ERT meters. The other one simply concerned the fees, and the customers did not want to pay the opt-out fees.
Okay, but Mr. McKeel, you've asserted today that
I disagree with that. Garrick was specifically about RF, but when you look at the Paskalev complaint, they talk about the health issues with RF, and when you look at the Volmer complaint, they talk about the health issues with the RF, along with the opt-out fee and why the fee shouldn't be charged. But that was one component of their complaint.
okay, but the company believes that that is a significant reason
We
for
hear
the
that all
opt-out
the
request.
time, and
so-
we are still working with Mr. Garrick, as the commission ordered us to do, to find a mutually appropriate time to put in an ERT meter. He doesn't want RF, and so we've sent him a hammer letter essentially saying, if you don't agree, we're going to have to come out and put the ERT meter on without your agreement.
Okay, but you're finding by simply offering the non-RF meter, that satisfies the customer.
Yes, and again, we have a very small number of customers who've opted out, and there's peace in the village.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Go ahead.
Follow-up, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just to follow up on that, peace in the village of PHI, but what about the rest of the state, where we've issued significant number of orders saying something very different?
Well, I think the answer to that, with the exception, like for BG&E, it's fully consistent with your order in 86200, because the legacy meter at BG&E was the ERT meter.
Commissioner Linton.
So they'd already had the ERT meter on their houses. And that seems to me to be a logical, reasonable, defensible answer.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on the assertion that there was a minimal cost between the difference of reading the solid state meter versus the ERT meter. And the data responses, and I'll be using the PEPCO filing that you made. The data responses that you gave there, you stated that there hadn't been any internal study done to determine what the difference would be in terms of the cost of reading one versus the other one. But the assertion is that there's a difference in the time required and to read the solid state meter versus the ERT meter.
Yes.
For reading your solid state meters, is it fair to say that the majority, if not all of them, are outdoors?
Yes, we do not, your Commissioner, we have very few issues of indoor meters in the PHI service territories. That's not how our housing stock is in Maryland. It's a different story in the District of Columbia. But that's part of the reason I think we never went to the ERT solution.
And since they're outdoors, does that also mean that they're not behind a bush or behind a dog or fence or something like that?
By and large, they are not.
Okay.
I mean, we have a large number of meters, but I'm told that for the opt-out meters that we have, if they were hard to access, we put on an ERT meter, which was our practice that we'd always had. And so to the extent that there's a hard to access opt-out meter, they have an ERT meter on it. But by and large, no, there's not any issues with reading the 1024 in Pepco and the 1200 in Delmarva.
Okay, so for those, so you have the contractor that has I think you stated earlier was just a flat rate that you
Yes.
pay the contractor to read the
For
meters?
Pepco, yes.
So from a cost perspective then, if a number of customers see that we've made this tariff change and suddenly decide they'd like to pay the fee and opt out too, so that number of custom meters that you have to read, suppose it goes from 1,000 that it is now to say 5,000. Customers decide they don't want RF either. How's that contract impacted by that? Are we now looking at a situation where there's going to be new costs, or is it?
I don't think that contract is impacted in any way. This is what it costs to read a meter. And I would say to you, Commissioner, that, and I tried to give a flavor of this in our letter, our opt-out numbers from the day the commission issued that interim order to as we stand here today has varied by 100. It's gone down a little bit in Pepco. It's gone up 100 in Delmarva Power. It's just not been a large issue in our service territories.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of the complaints there, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. Mr. Michael, you filed this proposal back in the summer, if I recall. Is that right?
Yes?
Do you need a determination from the bench today?
No?
There's some moving parts here. We have a number of orders stretching back to 2012. I personally need a little more time to review those orders, review staff's position. I agree entirely with the BGE precedent that the utility should have the ability to swap out the meter to something more sophisticated if there's evidence that the customer is tampering with it. So what we'll do here is we'll put this item on a continuance for just a couple of weeks. You need not do anything. However, if the parties want to have any conversations or communications in that interim period, you're free to do so, although it sounds like staff council, OPC are on a different page than
We've tried that.
utility. It sounds like it. How does February 5th? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. We have one other question from Commissioner Linton, but how does February 5th look on your calendar?
Great.
Okay. Staff council?
We will be here,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Commissioner, so we'll move this item to the February 5th administrative meeting. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one extra question regarding the request to place a AMI or ERT meter on those properties where there's been tampering or theft. Has there been any, can you give me a flavor for what the experience has been with that? Do you see that happening a lot? Or is it?
We had an incident where we had some tampering on an opt-out customer's meter, and there was a threat, one incident, and my folks came to me and said, you know, what does our tariff say about that? And I said nothing, but it should. And then I looked at what the BG&E tariff said. I spoke with BG&E, and it was clear that BG&E tariff said that, and it made sense. Again, another thing that I should have caught before that I didn't. And so I indicated to my folks, because safety is number one, that we would come to the commission and ask for that to be changed. So I'm aware of one incident that spurred that particular change.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. We will get this wrapped up at the February 5th administrative meeting. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, next item on the agenda, item 14, is Baltimore Gas and Electric Company filed Supplement 460 to PSC Maryland G9. The company proposes to revise certain gas service extension charges.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Olivia Kirkendall on behalf of staff. Each year, Baltimore Gas and Electric updates its standard gas service line extension charge to reflect its actual cost from the prior year. BGE proposes to revise this charge in its tariff to decrease its per foot charge from $18.78 to $17.39 for gas line extensions more than 150 feet. The company states that it reevaluated its methodology for this charge in response to questions from the Commission about the increase of the charge between 2017 to 2019. Staff has reviewed the company's methodology and recommends the Commission accept the proposed tariff for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkendall. Ms. Sikora, do you need to add anything for the company?
No, I was just gonna say happy holidays to all the commissioners, and
Thank,
meeting is always kind of the official start of the holidays for us in the utility business, once we get all this done.
it's a little disturbing, but any questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I guess that's mine now. Yeah, is it number 14?
15. Sorry, 14.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, for item number 14, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved. Happy holidays.
Next item, item 15, Washington Gas Light Company filed revised tariff pages. The company proposes changes to its Maryland tariff to conform to order number 89303.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Wolson on behalf of staff. On November 15th, Washington Gas Light filed revised tariff pages reflecting 3 updates to its rate design in compliance with final order number 89303 in its recent rate case. That was case number 9605. Staff has reviewed the company's revised tariffs and supporting calculations and finds the changes reasonable and in conformance with the Commissioner's order in case number 9605 and the settlement agreement approved by the Commission in that case on October 15th of this year. Accordingly, staff recommends the Commission accept the tariff for filing with an effective date of October 15th, 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Dodge, do you have anything to add?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. John Dodge on behalf of Washington Gas. I'm too nervous to say happy holidays, so I'll just say Merry Christmas instead.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. For item number 15, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of October 15th, 2019.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Next item, item 16, is the filing from the Potomac Edison Company. It's its annual electric distribution investment surcharge report for 2019 and associated tariff revisions.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Dean on behalf of staff. Item 16 is the first annual report and tariff filing by the Potomac Edison Company for its electric distribution investment surcharge tariff. Under Public Utilities Section 4-202, the electric company tariff is to include its rates and charges, terms and conditions, and policies and practices in providing regulated services. In order number 89072 and case number 9490, the Commission approved a surcharge to recover costs of reliability improvements regarding distribution automation schemes, reclosers, and underground cable replacement. The 2020 work reported in the report includes installation of 2 distribution automation schemes, replacement of 15 reclosers, and about 50 miles of underground cable. As discussed in the staff comments, staff has reviewed the proposed work, cost estimates, and the calculation of the surcharges for the different customer classes and determined that they were correctly calculated. For a nominal residential customer using 1,000 kilowatts per month, the surcharge of $0.00030 per kilowatt hour will result in an increase in the monthly bill of about 17 cents. Staff recommends that the Commission approve the Potomac Edison 2019 Annual EDIS report, and staff also recommends that the Commission accept the related Potomac Edison tariff with the effective date of January 1, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Counsel for the utility.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout for Potomac Edison. The company agrees with the staff's 2 main recommendations. There were 2 subsidiary points made in staff's extensive and generally very thorough analysis that I could comment on if the Commission likes. One was concerning possibly moving up the filing date on the annual report, and the other was with respect to carrying charges on over and under collections from one year to the next with respect to the EDIS surcharge. Again, I'm prepared to address either issue if the Commission.
Thank you. If you could start with the filing date of December 1st.
Yes, as the Commission may recall, there was some discussion of this at when we filed our interim report, and also either when we filed our interim report or when we filed the tariff. And we advised the Commission at that time, and I believe staff agreed and understood at that time, that we would not have data available materially before December 1st to be able to give to staff and to the Commission 10 months of completed data before December 1st. And we undertook at that time to make our best efforts to file no later than December 1st and earlier if we could. We did in fact file on December 26th. We recognize that given where the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays have fallen this year, that did give staff less time than they normally would have had to analyze the data that was filed. And all I can say is that we were working on the filing right through into the 26th, the day that we made it. So that was this year the earliest we could get it in. We will, consistent with our prior voluntary representations to the staff and to the Commission, we will consistently continue every year to try to file before December 1st and as early before December 1st as we can. But as long as we're going to try to provide the Commission with 10 months of actual data ending October 31st, it's going to be in that range of a few days to a week before December 1st that we get these reports in. And you know, the Thanksgiving holiday could well fall, the calendar works in such a way that it will fall earlier, and so complicate our end as opposed to complicating the staff's end. So we'll just continue to make our best efforts.
Thanks. I recognize staff probably requested what would staff want? A few more weeks, an additional month? Obviously, it seems that the utility is getting jammed up providing actual data through the end of the third quarter. Mr. Lowe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Christopher Lowe on behalf of staff. Just to be consistent with other companies like BG&E's with respect to their surcharge program and the reporting requirement, they were required to file by November 1st each year, and staff believe that Potomac Edison should be held to the same standard as the other companies. That way, if they file the report by November 1st, that would give us enough time to perform our analysis or issue a normal round of discovery request, and also provide comments and recommendations to the commission.
Mr. Lowe, if the data is not available until, the full actual data is not available until October 31st, if I understand correctly, how would the utility be able to get that information to the commission on the next day? And Mr. Trout, if I mischaracterized, please correct me.
Mr. Chairman, you're correct that the data wouldn't be finished accumulating until October 31st. It actually wouldn't be available until in some cases, well into November. So that's what's driving it, trying to get the 10 months of actual data. I am not aware of how the other utilities report with respect to their parallel programs, but it may be, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, it may be that they're only providing 9 months of actual and 3 months of estimates. We're providing 10 months of actual and 2 months of estimates, and that could be what's driving the difference.
Mr. Lowe, do you know if BGE is operating on a different calendar in order to get you the information by November 1st?
I would have to check with council,
Okay.
or
All right.
maybe the counties.
All right, well, on this point, it appears that the utility is using good faith, best efforts to get this information as soon as possible. It sounds like around Thanksgiving. So we won't make any changes to the December 1st deadline, reporting deadline. But perhaps you could go back, check, see how BG&E is done, and communicate with Mr. Trout. Maybe we could have some informal resolution to get you at least a few more days to digest this information for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Could I also ask that when you do that, ask the question, what makes 10 months of data magical? Is 9 months of data sufficient? Is that a sufficient data set to do the analysis, or are you locked into 10 months of data? If you could do that, if you look at that, when you look at the whole issue, I'd appreciate it.
No problem.
Mr. Trout, with respect to the issue of carrying charges?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There is not a single uniform approach taken by the commission, to our understanding, with respect to carrying charges on surcharges. In fact, the one instance where we are aware of the commission awarding carrying charges, both on under collections and over collections, is with respect to Warrior Run. Empower Maryland, which is not unique to Potomac Edison, but rather is a program that all of the electric utilities, or all the investor-owned electric utilities, and SMECO perform. There are not carrying charges. So when this program was constructed, the tariffs were submitted to the commission and were approved by the commission. We did not include carrying charges either way. That said, if the commission were to decide now that going forward, for example, it wanted carrying charges to apply, the company could do that, and all that we would respectfully request would be that it be applied symmetrically. That is to say, if there is an overcollection, the company would credit customers with carrying charges at our allowed rate of return. But likewise, if there was an undercollection, we would, in the next year's tariff, collect carrying charges on that undercollection at the company's allowed rate of return.
Okay. An issue for the commission to consider, not necessarily addressed today, but it's an important issue, and we should be consistent. I likewise thank the team. Very thorough buck sheet that you put together here, and I am supportive of approving the EDS report. With that, is there any more questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the company's 2019 annual EDIS report and accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
All in favor? Aye. Motion is approved.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think we can call items 17 and 23 collectively together. They're filings from the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc., Washington Gas Light Company, Delmarva Power and Light Company, the Potomac Edison Company, and the Potomac Electric Power Company. They've all filed revised tariff pages proposing to update their Empower Maryland surcharge.
Thank you. And since we have 7 items up right now, we don't need utility council to all stand in line. We may call you one by one, so get comfortable. Good morning, Mr. Mosier.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Kevin Mosier on behalf of staff. In November, Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, Delmarva Power and Light, Potomac Edison Power Company, Potomac Electric Power Company, Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, and Washington Gas Light filed proposed to revise the Empower Maryland surcharges for residential and commercial customers for 2020. The cost estimates for 2020 are based on the company's 2018 to 2020 Empower Maryland plan approved by the Commission on December 22nd, 2017 by Order 88514. Staff notes that the cost estimates in the instant filings are consistent with the approved 2020 cost in the company's plans. No other party has filed comments on these filing. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission accept for filing the revised tariff with an effective date reflecting the dates requested by the companies.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Very succinct. We reviewed all the filings. Some of the filings justified a slight rate increase and some a slight rate decrease. I did not have any questions on these Empower filings, and my colleagues do not appear to have any either. So with that, I would ask for a motion on items 17 through 23.
Mr. Chairman, for items number 17, 18, 19, and 22, I move the Commission accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020. And for items 20, 21, and 23, I move the Commission accept the tariff revisions for filing effective with January 2020 billings.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The motions are approved.
Next item on the agenda, item 24, is the Potomac Edison Company filed revised tariff pages. The company proposes to update its cogeneration PURPA project surcharge.
Kevin Mosier again on behalf of staff. By letter dated November 25th, 2019, Potomac Edison proposed to update its tariffs to reflect the cogeneration PURPA project surcharge for the period of January 2020 through December 2020. By orders number 75851 and 76009 and case number 8797, the Commission approved a settlement agreement that authorized the implementation of the Warrior End surcharge. The surcharge is designed to cover the contract payments less received revenues from the sale of power. The current residential rate will be increased to 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour, so about $4.64 for the average residential customer. Staff reviewed the supporting documents submitted by Potomac Edison and believes the components have been calculated in accordance with the settlement agreement. Staff therefore recommends the Commission accept for filing the revised tariff pages with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Trout. Anything more to add?
No, we agree with the staff's recommendations. I would only add that I bring you greetings from Patrick Ryan Murray, who is now just under 36 hours old. My grandson.
Your young Master Murray, congratulations. Thank you. Is there...
Mr. Chairman, real quick, I know that you've asked for this in the past. The surcharge is now at just under $1.1 million, or $1.1 billion is the total revenue recovered.
1.1 billion.
Yes.
Okay. And this has been running since the year 2000?
That's correct.
Okay, 20 years, 10 more to go. Obviously, PURPA is a hot topic in Washington. Both Congress and FERC are looking at changes. I'm not sure if they would affect this contract. I doubt it, but 1.1 billion is not pocket change.
I will also note, Mr. Chairman, the increase this year of $4 plus is about $55 and change, or in that vicinity on an average customer. So it's not in some areas of Western Maryland. That's it's significant for an annual hit increase with all the other increases going on. So It is what it is.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for item number 24, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
Let me reflect, maybe at this point, halfway through, we'll take a, no, not halfway through, or towards the end. As I, oh yeah, we need to vote first. Okay, on the motion, how do the commissioners vote on the motion? Aye. Any, no no's? It's approved. Thank you, Mr. Trapp.
Reflect away now.
I've just been continually impressed. This is my first full year that I'm concluding with not only the professionalism of our staff, but all the attorneys that and regulatory affairs folks that present before us. That extends to the Office of People's Counsel and the Utility and Public Service Bar that comes. They pack the room every Wednesday at 10 a.m. I'm always impressed with the pleadings that are filed, the quality of the writing by our attorneys, staff counsel, as well as all of you. So I just wanted to make that clear. It's a great group. Makes these meetings go by well. Everything is well cited and researched. So I just wanted to share that. With that, Mr. Secretary, number 25.
Item 25 is a filing from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, Delmarva Power and Light Company, and Potomac Electric Power Company. The Exelon Joint Utilities filed revised tariff pages. They propose enhancements to the public electric vehicle charging station rates to include direct current fast charge EV charging rates for certain multi-vehicle operators.
Mr. McAuliffe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Drew McAuliffe on behalf of staff. On November 18th, 2019, the Exelon Joint Utilities submitted a modification to their public electric vehicle charging station rates for multi-vehicle operators. The joint utility filing requests that the tariffs be effective January 1st, 2020. By order number 88997 in January 2019, the Commission granted the petition for implementation of a statewide electric vehicle portfolio. This filing is a modification to the electric vehicle portfolio the Commission has previously approved. The charging rate for the multi-vehicle operators was not part of the initial pilot plan. In this proposal, the utilities are requesting that the previously approved DCFC charging rate of 34 cents per kilowatt hour be reduced by 25%, to 25.5 cents per kilowatt hour for multi-vehicle operators. Multi-vehicle operators must own 5 EVs titled and registered in Maryland. The utilities project the cost of this program to be $500,000 for the 3 utilities combined. The costs are largely due to the proposal's rideshare program, which the utilities have developed with Lyft. This proposed rideshare program will introduce 100 new EVs across the 3 service territories and will focus their efforts in LMI communities. This will be done by hiring drivers from these communities, as well as offering discounted rates to these communities, to various locations such as grocery stores. This rideshare program may increase the utilization of utility-owned public vehicle charging stations and spread the benefits of EVs to these LMI communities. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the tariff pages for filing with an effective date of January 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. McAuliffe. Does Office of People's Counsel wish to make any comments?
Chairman, members of the Commission, I'm Fred Hoover on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. We filed written comments raising some concerns that we have with this proposal. I'll stand by those comments and we can answer any questions. Just to say that while we're not opposed to the goal of what they're trying to do here, we do have some questions about the details and specifically the implementation of both of these proposals that are before you.
Thank you. I know we have a number of comments and interventions that were filed. We've heard from Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, Sierra Club, Tesla, some private chargers, City of Baltimore, and a number of others. Do any of those parties wish to speak before I allow the utility to present? Yes. Please state your name and affiliation.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Sarah Raffleson, and I'm the Director of Market Development for EVgo. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're the largest provider of public fast charging stations. We have about 750 locations nationwide in about 34 states, including Maryland, where we have about 50 or so chargers and growing. And the EVgo filed jointly with several other leading participants in the charging infrastructure space in opposition. And first, I want to say that was not a decision that we took lightly. We very much support fleet electrification, at least for EVgo. 75 million electric vehicle miles traveled on our network last year nationally, and then about 1/3 of those, or 25 million electric vehicle miles traveled, came from fleets. So we obviously support fleet electrification, and also last year we were in support of the original working group petition that led to the order. We came out and supported that both in person and through written comments. But EVgo and the other market participants opposed this for mainly two reasons. The first was procedural. So we learned this through something that we had worked to put together earlier in the summer, that if we bring something forward without properly vetting it through the PC44 working group, we were asked to bring that back and workshop it more, vet it, and come back with a consensus proposal. And we would ask that the same be applied here. For this petition, it was not properly vetted through the PC44 working group. If it had been, and there was an agenda item related to this where stakeholders would come and be able to vet this further, we would have raised several concerns, all of which are in our comments, which I'm happy to answer questions about. But speaking specifically to the impacts on the competitive market, we see that this is not a tariff that would be provided equally. This is a subsidy to the utility-owned stations, again, which we supported. We came forth and supported utility-owned stations. But this would be a subsidy directly to those stations at a discount, and we worry that it would undercut our ability to be able to work out significant deals with fleet providers as well. So it's not something that's being provided equally to different market participants. And we also worry that we would see perhaps decreased usage on our networks and increased usage on the utility-owned networks, which could also discourage future development as well, because when we're looking to make investment decisions, we look toward where the demand is. And at least speaking for EVgo, our business model is largely on the utilization of the charger. So in conclusion, due to procedural reasons, we do think that we recommend that this be opposed today and perhaps vetted more through the PC44 working group, so we can have a more holistic discussion on how we can incent fleet electrification in Maryland. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. The commissioners may have questions for you after we go through the first round. I would just note for the record, and I didn't mention, Green Lots, another EV developer, did file in support of the Exelon Utilities proposal. Additional speakers.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Paul Verchinsky, 5475 Sleeping Dog Lane, Columbia, Maryland. I'm part of your EV work group. I'm also on the Zero Emissions Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council. I was appointed by Governor Hogan to represent the public. Case 9478, I tried to access this morning. My comments were not shown, so therefore I'm here in person.
Rest assured, we do have your comments, Mr. Verchinsky. They are in our record.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that.
We'll make sure they, if it's not on the website, we'll make sure that they do get on the website.
Thank you very much. I'd like to further comment then on this 5-year pilot. I've already installed an L2 under the residential portion of the BGE residential tranche, if you will. And I'm an EV owner since November of 2012. I'd like to point out to the Commission that this is very early days in this pilot. And trying to correct something which you don't even know needs to be corrected is probably the wrong approach this early in a 5-year pilot. The issue really is that a reduced tariff for public chargers is not something that should be even considered at this stage. And the other thing that I do recognize as part of the public chargers is that governments are supposed to be locating these in 24/7 locations. And it seems to me that if you want to go with LMI, that government will be more cognizant of where these should go in LMI areas. I know that several commissioners spoke about wanting to make sure that there was an equitable distribution of chargers throughout all of Maryland, not only in counties like myself, Howard, but also out in rural areas and the rest where you might have LMI areas. But I don't think that the folks that are proposing to do this and incentivize this through Lyft, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. With that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those based on my comments that have already been submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Verchinsky. Any additional parties? Yes, please approach.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Josh Cohen with Greenlots. And as you mentioned, we submitted a letter that I believe BGE included in its submission. Greenlots is supporting this for a very simple reason, which is that our understanding is that for rideshare companies like Lyft and Uber to enter markets with their EV programs, the cost to charge up has to be more economical than the price of fueling up a gas car. And so the current per kWh public charging rate, my understanding, is more expensive than the equivalent price of filling up a gas car. So if that's the case, we're going to miss out on Lyft entering the market at this time. And so the proposed discount, my understanding, makes it economical, makes that equation work. And notwithstanding the fact that Greenlots also supports the working group process, and everything else being equal, we would encourage the utilities to leverage the members of the working group to review proposals. In this particular case, the utilities need to come back in 6 months anyway, according to their proposal. It offers all of us and the commission an opportunity to see how this proposed discount is working, and we think the value of enabling Lyft to come into the market with their EV program outweighs the process concern of sending it to the working group first.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, just to clarify, you are a member of the work group as well?
Yes.
Okay. Any additional parties wish to speak? Let's hear from the Exelon Company.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Dan Herson on behalf of the Exelon Joint Utilities. I've brought with me today Mr. Devesh Gupta, who's BG's Director of Utility Strategy. I'm actually going to turn it over to him for some brief remarks on the program. We also have a representative from Lyft in attendance today if there are any questions about the rideshare program itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Just a couple of comments, and then certainly available to take questions today as well. So the Commission has charged us with keeping a close eye on the costs for implementing public infrastructure and making sure that we're deriving benefits for consumers at the end of the day as well, for our ratepayers. So each of the times that we've come in front of the Commission as well, we've gotten the sense from the Commission and explicit words from the Commission that we should be coming with innovative ideas to try to reduce ratepayer costs, increase utilization of these stations, or what have you. And so that was part of why we came with this particular proposal. Certainly all of the costs related to the proposal will be subject to review when we bring the cost of our overall EV Smart Portfolio programs to the Commission for approval of those costs, review and approval of those costs. So we are very open to including the data and all the costs as we incur those costs over time. A couple of points about the proposal itself. The first just being the multi-vehicle operator rate. For us, this is one of those ways that we can be innovative about driving the costs down for ratepayers at the end of the day. If we can drive more utilization by more vehicles and encourage more electrification, that's going to drive down the residual costs for that equipment over time. We try to look at the market and set that rate still within the market rates that we presented to the Commission, but at a discount enough to incentivize those fleet operators to think about electrification and to start to convert their fleets and take part in that. The other point would be, for us, the focus on the limited income communities. Again,
I think it's already been stated, we were asked to think equitably about the distribution of these stations across our territory. And part of that is involving our limited income communities in the electrification of transportation. Oftentimes people, when they think about electrification of transportation, they're thinking, oh, well, the vehicles cost so much, they're going to benefit middle to high income individuals, and that's who's going to drive innovation and this transition. There's a real opportunity here in these limited income neighborhoods as well. Rather than just siting chargers in these neighborhoods and allowing them to be used by, say, transient individuals that are coming through, charging, and leaving, there are ways that we can include these communities too, both through accessing transportation that they're already accessing, and that would be rideshare. I think Lyft, over half of their rides in the region are originating or ending in limited income neighborhoods. So they're using this as a form of transportation already. Why can't we think of ways to help electrify that? So that these stations, when we put them in, yes, they're convenient to all parts of the city, but they're also getting utilized, providing actual benefits to the communities that are hosting them. We can do that through a variety of ways that are laid out in the filing. I think the only last point that I would make is that, we do feel like we have broad support. We did sit down with community groups, with environmental groups, with network providers. We did offer to have conversations with members of the working group. At the time, I think we went through a period where the working group hadn't been meeting, so it wasn't presented formally in that setting. But we feel like we have broad support here, and for good reason, and it's providing strong benefits that are measured as well. This is really kind of a chicken and the egg, and this is either the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken, in terms of sitting down with Lyft after this and hammering out the details of what would be a teaming agreement to help them to introduce vehicles into the marketplace. And we would certainly continue to look out for ratepayers' interest in terms of what we would want to see from that program. As I said, completely open to questions and things, and we encourage the discussion today.
Thank you. And would your partner from Lyft like to make any comments? If he's here? Yeah. We recognize this is a bifurcated two-part proposal here, so just be curious to hear from the company.
Corey Rochelle from Lyft. No additional comments, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you for coming. Yes, and your name for the record, sir.
Corey Ershow, E-R-S-H-O-W.
Thank you, sir. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Couple questions maybe for the applicants. So the buck sheet seems to read that the staff asked for the work papers for the 25% reduction, and effectively we're told that's simply what the consultant recommended with no kind of background or basis there. What makes 25% magical as opposed to 20% or 15% or 30%? What's the basis of 25%?
Well, in terms of, it largely was discussions with our consultant and some thoughts on what's happening in the marketplace, where they've seen utilization, and what's caused that utilization. And fleet electrification is one of those things. Rideshare are one of those things that can increase.
Right, I understand the concept, but I'm asking specifically why 25%?
Why the 25%? And it's both an art and a science. It's when we came to the commission for our tariff rates, which are supposed to be market-based rates, we took a survey of where are charging rates in the region in Maryland, from the low end to the high end, and then we had a rate that was approved by the commission that was somewhere in the middle. So when we thought about the potential for a multi-vehicle operator rate, the thought was, well, it still needs to be within that range of competitive rates that are out there, but it also needs to be attractive enough to incentivize fleet operators to think about getting into this market so that they can have those conversations internally, feel comfortable that, okay, that's a cost we can manage, and there will be charging infrastructure out there in the field. At the end of the day, the cheapest place to charge is always going to be at home or at your workplace, meaning at your home base if you're a fleet operator as well. But you want to have comfort that out there in the field, the charging infrastructure is there and you can manage the cost. So we tried to keep that thinking about, okay, what would incentivize these fleet operators to come to the table and think about electrification, but not eat into the revenues on these stations such that it makes it untenable. We wanted to continue to drive value for these so that at the end of the day, again, the residual cost to ratepayers that maybe aren't plugging in vehicles is going to be as low as possible.
So I appreciate that. Would you at least acknowledge it would be helpful for us to see that work, how you've gotten to that point instead of just, it almost looks like a number pulled out of thin air, although I appreciate
Certainly,
your
yeah,
response.
and I think there was, it's not that it's out of thin air, but it is thinking about the discussions that we've had with fleet operators about, hey, where would you need to see the rates for?
Let me try to re-say this again. I think it would be helpful for the commission to see that work. Thank you. I got one more question for you. How would Exelon address the competitive issues that we just heard raised by EVgo?
And certainly sensitive to competitive issues, and we tried to have some of those discussions with the competitors as well. And we understand this is a competitive marketplace. Our tariff rate is a market-based rate that is in that market as well. The challenge here is that our stations, at the end of the day, they also have to drive utilization too. So these types of strategies are things that are being used out there in the marketplace already. Some of the interveners that are part of the working group, they've already entered into agreements with Lyft in other markets. Electrify America has a national agreement with Lyft for wherever they have infrastructure. Now, those rates aren't public. We don't know what the rates are that they've agreed
Right, but
to.
they're not regulated.
They're not regulated. That's right.
They're not regulated monopolies.
Whereas we are regulated.
Right.
Right. If we're thinking about trying to bring those benefits as early in time as possible to buy down the costs of the infrastructure, we have to think in some ways more creatively. And this is one of those ways. But nothing is preventing those market entrants from entering into the same types of agreements. EVgo as well has entered into those agreements with Lyft in other markets. I don't know if they've done so in Maryland or not. Nothing would prevent them from doing so.
I think they're just suggesting maybe a more robust discussion in the EV working group. What do you say to that thought?
We welcome those discussions, and as a matter of fact, we've had some of those discussions. They weren't in the working group setting, but they were with those parties that are members of the working group, some of whom are submitted comments. So we would certainly welcome additional discussions. And these rates, as we're setting them again, they are to be reviewed by the commission every 6 months.
I wanted to ask Mr. Cohen, if you're still here, come back up. Good morning.
Morning.
You talked about the relative costs of gasoline versus electricity and why this is important. And how can you definitively say that when you consider the high volatility of a commodity like gasoline? I mean, yeah, it's low now, but it may not be by July. It's hard for me to kind of grasp that argument when there's so much volatility in gasoline prices. How do you know? I mean, maybe by July the current rate makes this competitive.
No, I hear you, Commissioner, and I take it a step further. It's not just the volatility in the market, but depending on the vehicle, the range will be different, on a per gallon basis. But you also get the same thing on the electric vehicle side, where the cost per kWh per mile varies based on the EV. So we're dealing with overall ranges. I'll be happy to go back and provide the commission with some numbers that offer some comparisons. That would be helpful.
It might be helpful if these discussions continue to at least get that kind of discussion into the mix.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for the staff. A number of parties have suggested that they wanted additional information about this program. As you've heard already, and as I'm sure you're familiar with, it wasn't presented through the working group process, and yet the staff has recommended that the commission accept the tariff pages. In light of the comments that you've heard from some of the other parties, there are suggestions that there be additional information provided. What's your response to that? And help me to understand a little more why the staff thinks it's still appropriate for the commission to move forward with this project.
Well, in regards to the working group process, staff wasn't aware that the utility needed to provide these prior to making filings in the working group. For example, the off-bill credit that PE proposed was not vetted through the working group process as well as I'm aware. I guess it was staff's understanding that the working group process was to produce the original portfolio. Now, having input through the working group process is great, and we always appreciate extra information from all the parties. But I guess I wasn't aware that this had to go through that process for each filing in regards to this petition. I mean, in regards with the competitive rates, staff is very sensitive to that. But we feel this is an extremely limited in scope. So for Lyft, for the proposal, they're estimating 100 vehicles. Now, it would be staff's understanding that fleets such, say, as taxi cabs, Baltimore taxi cabs, if they wanted to switch to EVs, I wouldn't believe that they would even use this rate. They would charge at their garage in-house because that rate would be drastically lower than the 25.5 cents. I just did a quick calculation. For example, for BGE, these customers would most likely be on the GLRP class, which is a Type 2 rate, and their all-in rate for SOS and distribution would be under 10 cents. Now, they do have a demand charge. Now, these companies would have to be aware just to not charge during their 30-minute peak demand for that month, and they would only pay 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So it would be staff's understanding that this would be very limited, and this would be this is a pilot, and this would be a good way to test if these rates incentivize rideshare services from bringing EVs to the service territory. As well, the drivers of these vehicles, if they have any access to home charging, they would obviously prefer that over this 25-cent rate because I believe the all-in residential rate is around 25 cents with SOS service. 12 cents with SOS service. So that's half of this. So, and then there's also level 2 charging, which is 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So there's various options for drivers to find a lower rate than this 25.5 cents.
So I guess it sounds like part of your consideration of this was that you didn't anticipate that the persons that were charging their cars through this program would actually use it as frequently as might be hoped for.
The Lyft, I would think, would be the most likely to use it because if you're having a lot of rides, you're out, you need a quick charge, you may use this because, say, in 30 minutes you could get around a 200-mile charge. But if you're I know I've read a lot of articles about Amazon trying to introduce more vans that are electric. You may go through your route during the day and then come back to the warehouse or the distribution center at night and charge overnight. So you wouldn't want it because it's a lower rate. They would be aware of the costs. But for Lyft drivers, I think they would most likely use this. And it, again, is to get the use in the LMI communities because we are concerned about utilization for these chargers as well because of the cost to ratepayers.
Okay. My second question has to do with your statements on page 6. Sorry, a little glare here. On page 6 of your comments, you're referencing the Commission's ability to determine if the costs are prudent towards the conclusion of the pilot. What would staff look at? What type of standard were you considering at that time when you were drafting this? That you looked at to say that this is what would need to be met in order for this to be a prudent expense?
I wouldn't say there's any specific thing we're looking at. I mean, for all the costs related to this EV portfolio, staff will examine them thoroughly. Say, the estimates for public charging stations were way off base from what the utilities originally provided. That may be something we look at. For this specific proposal, I guess I would think part of the cost the utility was stating is having recruitment drives in these communities to find drivers for this program. If they spend a large amount of money way over estimate and don't even get drivers from these communities, that would be something I would say, well, that wasn't prudent. You didn't get any drivers. This didn't benefit these communities that you said it would. I guess that's one example off the top of my head. But.
Okay. All right. One other question for, I guess it would be the company, but it might be for Lyft. You've mentioned here that you were attempting to offer these benefits to LMI communities. Is there a particular type of process you were going to use in order to identify where a LMI community is? I noted that Baltimore City was one of the people or organizations or areas that supported this proposal. But obviously, the entire city is not considered LMI. So what were you looking at to determine that something is LMI or areas LMI as opposed to not?
Well, part of that is working with governmental entities themselves where these chargers are going to be sited and talking to them about what communities are they interested in, where are they interested in siting chargers. Part is outreach that we've received from communities that are interested in having chargers sited in their neighborhoods. Part of what we're doing is taking a look at our overall territory, making sure that we have equitable distribution between the counties, just as in terms of geographical areas. And then within there, making sure that we are trying to site chargers where there isn't already public charging, and where others in the competitive market aren't necessarily addressing needs right now. Some of those end up being in limited income communities throughout our territory. And we'll look for opportunities to do that because this does present a way, again, to make sure that the benefits of electrification are centered where they might be able to help most as well, particularly when you think about environmental benefits.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell has a follow-up.
First, I can wait. I'll defer.
Okay, Commissioner Richard.
Oh, it's okay. I was interested in just following up on with staff about the work group process, because as you mentioned in the PE off-bill proposal, I believe it was staff recommendation at the time that we send it back to the work group proposal. So I guess where I'm going is my concern is do we have a set procedure for how we're going to look at these innovative programs and concepts, ideas, because I'm concerned that suddenly we're going to be a speed bump here if we're going to, get a proposal and have to send it back,
Right.
or if we don't have something that's laid out at how we can move forward. So, what is the staff recommendation here as far as how we take up these innovative proposals and not send them to a work group to die, or send them here just to be frustrated and sent back to another, round of whatever needs to go through?
With the PE proposal, I would just say they submitted that in the compliance filing, which wasn't originally discussed, so that's why staff had concern. They kind of threw it in with the rest of the original portfolio. There wasn't any discussion. At least this was a separate filing, is all I would say for that. For the work group, I mean, if, like I said, there's no set rules that I'm aware of. If the commission would state that, hey, any new proposal for this has to go for the working group, staff would be fine with that. But I guess maybe we'd have to just have the caveat that, like you said, it can't be sent to the working group to die. The various members can express their concerns with the proposal, and then at least have, the appropriate amount of time to address any proposal a utility, say, may make. But as far as I'm aware, there's no process, and if you'd like to set a process, that would be fine.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to. It just seems like now it's being thrown at us as a reason for us to delay taking an action.
Sure.
And at the time when it came into the compliance filing, I don't think there was anything in our overall, when we looked at the pilot that said, oh, absolutely, it can't go through a compliance filing. And today, it's just something a little bit different. So perhaps it's something maybe staff might want to think of, because I have a feeling that we're going to delay this today because of a process that we have not yet really laid out. But in any case,
Yeah, we can look at that.
yeah, because again, I think when we see innovation, this is exactly what we wanted to come out of this pilot phase, this 5-year pilot phase. So I really think that we need to do something to make sure again we're not just going in circles. And then with Lyft, I would be interested. This is something you're already doing. Is that correct? In Atlanta, Seattle, Denver. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we wouldn't be necessarily first, and so you could probably bring best practices from those cities, and how have they been adopted in those locations?
Yeah, for sure. So, just by way of background and sort of setting the landscape, we have 100 EVs as part of this program broadly in Atlanta and Seattle. We've just announced the intention to bring 200 to the Denver area. The Denver launch has not yet fully rolled out yet. I'm actually not sure that any of the vehicles have deployed yet. That should be sometime this month. Otherwise, the Atlanta and Seattle launch was 50 vehicles in each market. Sort of adjacent to this, done in consultation with the local utilities and electric companies, but not fully as an integrated partnership in the way that we are discussing so here. What we have learned is the driver base does tend to be predominantly lower middle income, reflective of our base altogether. And I think that it might be useful to understand who drives and rides for Lyft, and especially in the Baltimore area. So, unlike with EV ownership nationwide, which tends to skew predominantly wealthy, the median household income for a Lyft rider in the Lyft Baltimore region, which is not just Baltimore, it's sort of how we do our market differentials. If you have more questions on that, I've got a colleague who can answer some of the geography. But for our defined Baltimore region, the median household income for riders is $44,800 a year. That contrasts to a region-wide median income of $71,900 a year. Given our rider base is significantly more low and middle income than the population at large. 58% of our rides begin or end in a low-income community, and 65% of drivers identify with a minority group. 46% of passengers also report using transit at least once a week. It sort of gives you some kind of a picture of who's using these services. Our driver base does tend to be more heavily middle-income people who are looking for longer-term work opportunities. We have a lot of students in there, a lot of retirees, people who are looking for full-time work, or people who are using this as a second job to make some supplemental income.
Great, thank you. You anticipated my next question. That was, how does this serve the LMI community? I thought that was it was nicely laid out in the proposal. But and you're speaking now from real experience in these other cities, Atlanta, well, I guess not Denver yet, but in Seattle. This has been your
Yes.
Are these the statistics for your Lyft drivers here in Baltimore?
These are the statistics for the Lyft program here in Baltimore. I don't have the exact numbers in Baltimore and Seattle. My understanding is that they're reflective of Lyft drivers as part of the Red Dole fleet altogether. There's nothing remarkable about the EV drivers in Denver and Seattle relative to non-EV drivers as part of the rental program in those cities.
So these are LMI drivers, and they're serving the LMI community. That's what you've found so far, then, from your experience with this program.
For the most part, yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you very much. And again, I would just note that in Maryland we have a goal of 300,000 vehicles by 2025. We have this 5-year pilot. So again, I hope we can get a process together so that we can get these innovative ideas moving forward, and hopefully we don't lose Lyft with too long of a delay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gupta or Mr. Herson, whichever, is there anything magic about January 1st? If there were a delay of a month or 2 months, would that hypothetically, is there something magic about January 1st for this tariff?
I would say the only magical piece is this being in place so that the next steps can take place, right?
Okay.
If we're going to encourage Lyft to introduce vehicles into a fleet, they've also got to go negotiate with manufacturers of vehicles to figure out where they're going to get those vehicles from and get them into the marketplace.
So nothing magic about January 1st, but as soon as possible.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
I think expediency is important. So if there's a 30-day time period to come back, that would be perfectly acceptable. I would say, in order to get full benefits as we're rolling out our infrastructure, and over the course of a 5-year program, we'd like to see these vehicles introduced as soon in time as possible.
Okay. My next question is about costs. There's $500,000 is included in these materials, but I didn't see any breakdown of what is $500,000 being spent on, because I didn't see that.
And I can't speak to what Lyft will spend it on, but in our discussions with them, for them, in order to introduce vehicles into this program, they have to figure out how to bring the price into an even space with internal combustion engine ICE vehicles. In Colorado, you saw the state introduce legislation that allowed Lyft in that instance to be able to take advantage of additional incentives that brought the costs down. So when we talk about $500,000, it may be used by Lyft in order to make their program economical enough to be able to introduce vehicles. But for us, what we see is an opportunity to address limited income community needs, get word out there in terms of electric vehicles as well, by being able to have an EV Smart sticker and some leave behinds in these vehicles. When you think about how often they're going to be picking up rides, at a minimum of 20 per week, you're talking about 100,000 ride and drives a year. People that are getting into a vehicle that haven't necessarily been in an electric vehicle before that are getting some exposure to it. And if you start thinking that maybe those vehicles are doing more than 20 rides per week, or each of those rides is with 2 or more individuals, those numbers get very significant in terms
Right,
of
but I'm trying to understand, like, when you say, see, because I guess what I got from the materials, and there were a lot of them, and some of them came in, quite recently, but what I got from the materials was that most of the $500,000 would be spent on training and trying to get people out, trying to get drivers into the program and so on and so forth. Not that the money would be going to Lyft. So explain to me how much of the $500,000 is going to Lyft, and in what capacity it might be going to Lyft, because I didn't see that in the material.
Well, I think first, just to make clear the difference between the multi-vehicle operator rate versus the program that we're talking about.
Right. And I want that's a little bit confusing, because is the $500,000 including the discount on the multi-vehicle rate? Is that inclusive of that discount, and then you add, or is that different from the discount?
No, it would be different. The $500,000 that we cited in the proposal, those are program costs for a teaming arrangement with Lyft.
For the ride share. Okay, so that's separate from the 25 from the.
We would look to
Okay.
That is separate from.
Okay.
We would look to obtain a number of things for the dollars that we spend, and make sure that the dollars are spent in a way that are going to result in benefits, overall cost benefits for the portfolio.
So what is the $500,000 being spent on?
So things that we would look at, and again, this is kind of the next step for us, would be sitting down with Lyft and reaching an agreement, a teaming agreement, to get the things that we are interested in. These things include the commitments and the hours spent on things like workforce development, things like transportation access fund development, working with other NGOs, other companies around the area to develop transportation access funds. I would say part of it is involved in the materials that we would have in the vehicles and on the vehicles to signify that, okay, this is an electric vehicle, part of the EV Smart program in some way, or at least have that word out there. We also would like to think about, are there ways that we can work with Lyft on R&D programs? So is that something that we can include in those costs? We said up to, because those costs are to be determined as well. If we're not able to reach agreement on the things that we would like to see that provide value, that actually drive learnings and actual benefits to the overall portfolio, an agreement may not be reached, or it may not be reached up to that amount, but we wanted to put a cap on it from the outset.
Okay, so that's the $500,000, and we don't know how that's going to be spent, or what that's going to be spent on, or whether that full amount's going to be spent. But you're saying here that it won't exceed $500,000.
For us, it's a not to exceed, and
Okay.
certainly all those costs would be subject to review with appropriate data when we come in for cost recoveries.
Okay, and then for the 25% reduction on the multi-vehicle rate, is that meant to be inclusive in terms of into what you already expected to spend on the pilot, or would that be additional?
That would be inclusive, because of the intention for it is to drive more utilization.
Okay.
Right? So what we're talking about is incremental charging sessions on the public vehicle charging infrastructure that we're already spending as part of the program. So there's not a loss there. It's not additional expense to the program.
Okay.
The hope is that it's going to be reduced expense to ratepayers.
Right. That's what that was my understanding, but I just wanted to make sure. So, with respect to EM&V, because there is some mention of EM&V, and that would also be inclusive of the EM&V that was already included in the pilot costs?
Yeah, with respect to EM&V, the notion would be that just as with other aspects of the program, we'll file the appropriate data, the appropriate costs, provide that to the independent consultant, and everything would be available for review in front of the commission.
Okay. So, how, if the commission were to suggest that, you know, with some, you know, not necessarily that it go back to the working group, but that some additional materials be provided so that the commission has a little bit more meat on the bones of this proposal. And some of the information you mentioned that you were talking, that you would need to talk to Lyft about how you would spend this up to $500,000. Would a month or two be sufficient time for you to start those conversations and provided this commission with some additional information with respect to those expenditures?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think more than, you know, the end of, we're almost at the end of December, so the end of January would be an unreasonable time frame for the Exelon Joint Utilities side of things. I can't speak for Lyft in terms of their timeline and what they need to have in place before they're able to make decisions about what they can and cannot offer. But for us, we have an understanding of the types of things we'd like to see out of the program.
Okay. So, Mr. Ershaw, can you give me some information on that kind of a time frame?
So the biggest barrier to electrification, as we see it, is the capital cost of the vehicles. Ultimately, the cost of the vehicles gets passed on to the drivers who will be renting those vehicles. I think it's laid out a little bit in the proposal, but just by way of background, we have a rental program called Express Drive, by which drivers who want to be on the Lyft platform but either don't have their own personal vehicle or don't want to use their own vehicle to give those rides have the ability to sign up for a zero commitment or low commitment weekly rental. We want to bring EVs onto that platform itself. The difficulty is ultimately drivers are going to choose vehicles that based on the price point, and those price points are based on MSRP. And so because the sticker price of an electric vehicle tends to be so much higher than an equivalently serviceable gas car, we need to find a way to bridge those costs in order to drive down the price to the renter to be at parity with a conventional gas car. The analysis basically been made that works out to about $5,000 per vehicle in this market that we need to account for to get to price parity. I think that, you know, if we have an understanding that we will be able to account for the price delta, and we have confidence that there's going to be a critical mass of DC fast charge infrastructure in the region so that our drivers are able to take full advantage of the electric technology, then we can begin to sort of craft some of what Mr. Gupta is describing in terms of the specific programs and return to BGE. Things like education and awareness, better use of funds for ride and drive programs, and cost per exposure, which is much lower through this kind of a model than for the traditional ride and drive or any other kind of marketing campaign that's out there to my knowledge. So that's really the program as we see it and what is left to be discussed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up with staff based on Commissioner Linton's questioning. Take you back to page 3, though, and the last paragraph says, given the lack of information provided, staff cannot say if the proposal is cost-effective, and the utilities provided little explanation of the rate and costs. And yet, staff still recommends approval. They seem very contradictory. Help me out with that.
Well, so again, it was staff's interpretation that this would be very limited, essentially to these 100 vehicles. And again, the 25% discount was within the market rates. Now, again, it's hard for us to determine the cost effectiveness when this is a new program. We don't really know if this will increase the charger utilization 5%, 10%, 50%. So when we get to the cost effectiveness, it's frankly very hard to determine when we have nothing to base it on.
It seems to be saying, though, that if the utilities provided better explanation, you might be able to make that analysis.
It would be, it may make it slightly easier, but again, since for the semi-annual reports, we don't even have any information on utilization yet for the normal chargers, so to speculate on what the utilization would be, we just have no.
Right, which kind of gets me back to where Commissioner Linton led off on page 6.
Mhm.
So you request that the utilities provide detailed description of all costs in their semi-annual reports. And you request the utilities be required to file all data related to this program in their semi-annual reports. And I maintain it would probably be helpful to understand the work product that determined a 25% rate reduction as well.
Sure.
But if we don't order that, how's it gonna happen? It seems to me like you already asked them for information once and they didn't provide, at least on rates.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if the commission would order them to provide that, obviously staff would be happy with that. Yes, we did try to determine why this, like you stated, why 25% is a magical number.
If I don't, I think I hear maybe the movement towards a delay to look at some of this stuff. You may want to look at those recommendations too, if it comes back to us, to see if you want us to order the stuff that you've asked for and that you haven't gotten.
Yeah, well, yeah, staff would have no problem with delaying this. Again, it's also staff's understanding that any proposal for this EV portfolio would be included in these semi-annual reports, such as, particularly for this rate, how many EVs are charging on this rate, you know, what time of day, how often, et cetera, all that kind of.
So my suggestion, I guess, is if we do delay, you may want to look at your recommendations, see if it needs beefed up a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I won't hold everybody in suspense. I am going to be delaying this item. I do have some questions, so don't step away from the podium, Mr. Gupta. First question. This is just, how do we ensure that these Lyft drivers are hitting the minimum of 20 LMI rides a week?
That's probably a better question for Lyft than
Okay.
maybe that's part of their program requirements.
All right, let's see if yes, if you could answer that.
Yeah, and for clarification, I think that the 20 ride per week figure that Mr. Gupta was citing, that's the minimum to be part of the Express Drive program.
To rent the car.
To rent the car at all.
Okay.
I will say those kind of factors are subject to business decisions and changing. I will say that may be the minimum. Most drivers on the platform, is particularly in Express Drive, are doing significantly more than 20 rides per week.
But how do you know in Denver or Atlanta or Seattle that these rides are starting or ending in LMI communities? Are you doing an accounting for that?
That I believe there's been a slight misunderstanding on the 20 ride per week minimum. That's not specifically 20 LMI rides per week. It's just 20 rides per week overall.
To rent the EV.
To rent the EV, to rent the vehicle. And because we know that really the majority of our volume is occurring in lower income communities for the pickup and the drop off, and has a lower income rider base. That's how we know that the benefits are flowing to lower and middle income communities in a way that the EV industry has not been able to reach to date.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think this is a good concept. I like what I see on paper. I think this is, however, sufficiently complicated enough where the commissioners, or at least this commissioner, would have benefited from a pre-filing meeting, and I would encourage all utilities, at least speaking for myself, to have pre-filing meetings on such cases. On the matter of whether or not this should go through the work group, there is no obligation or requirement for the utilities to work through the EV work group. To the extent there is time, it's probably advisable that a proposal does solicit the input of the various constituencies. It makes sense, but there is no requirement to do so. I noted a number of the filings that did come in relatively late, requesting that we either tap the brakes or take a deeper look into this. And just speaking for myself, I need to get a little more comfortable with the facts. I'm glad that the Exelon utilities are thinking outside of the box. I think this is a relatively good program. I recognize that it's being proposed in other states. I just need a little more time here. And this perhaps may allow the utility to address some of the concerns you've heard from some of the commissioners to date. So what I'll do is suspend these tariff sheets for a limited time. Let me look at the calendar one moment. All right, the tariff sheets, Mr. Herson, are effective January 1st. Is that right? Okay. Mr. Collins, if we move this to the February 5th meeting along with the other item, what would we need to do with the tariff sheets?
Mr. Chairman, you can, you can suspend it for a minimum of 60 days. That'll get it to that point beyond the February 5th, and then if we address it then, we'll be okay.
Thank you. So by a vote of the commission, which we'll take in a moment, is that we will go ahead and suspend the tariff sheets. Move this to the February 5th, 2020 administrative meeting. I would ask that if any parties wish to file either responses or additional pleadings, file them by Wednesday, January 22nd. You heard a number of commissioners make a number of requests, so it would likely be in your best interest to do so. Any other requests from the parties, procedural requests from the parties before we move off this item? Okay, seeing none, by a vote of the commission to suspend the tariff sheets for a period of 60 days, all in favor? Any opposed? The tariff sheets are suspended. We'll see you back on the 5th. Let me ask the Exelon Utilities, is the 5th a good day?
Yeah. I'll be on vacation, but I'm sure you can.
Okay, all right. Just don't want you all to be on vacation. All right, we will, thank you, Mr. Mike Heel. We'll see everybody on this item back on the 5th of February.
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 more items on the agenda. I don't know if you want to call them together.
Let's call them together, yes.
The last 2 items on the agenda are items number 26 and 27. 26 is a filing from Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. It's its STRIDE 2020 project list and surcharge calculations. And 27 is Washington Gas Light Company. It's again, same thing. It's STRIDE surcharge. Both case, one case 9486, and the excuse me, 9468. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm going to talk about these in one after the other, but everyone is here to answer for each company. So, by order number 88714, issued May 30th, the Commission approved STRIDE 2 for BGE with a replacement rate of approximately 48 miles of main per year for all targeted assets except pre-1970 3/4 high-inch pressure steel services, whose replacement rate was allowed to be accelerated due to its leak rate. The Commission also required BGE to provide selection material and the role that each criterion plays in the selection of each STRIDE project, and more detailed information regarding cost of replacement services and mains in future filings. And this is BGE's second STRIDE 2 filing. This is also WGL's second STRIDE filing. It's made pursuant to order number 88943, issued December 11th, 2018. As approved, WGL's STRIDE 2 contains 5 distribution programs and 5 transmission programs. In its order, the Commission noted the approval of WGL's proposed STRIDE 2 plan, that this new plan maintains WGL's current acceleration rate, which constitutes completion of 120 miles of STRIDE infrastructure replacement over 5 years. And by approving WGL's STRIDE 2 plan, the Commission authorized an overall spend of $350,679,000 for the company's 10 programs. All reporting requirements remain in place for both BGE and WGL. BGE is recommending, is proposing to abandon or replace 52.92 miles of main in 2020. This includes 48 miles of cast iron and bare steel main and to abandon or replace approximately 10,025 services. Of these gas services, 5,000 are pre-1970 3/4 inch high-pressure steel and 4,525 related services under its BOP program. Staff, for BGE, staff has reviewed the projects and recommends the Commission approve the project list. Staff has also reviewed the surcharges, which are dependent on the rates put in place by Commission Order Number 89400, issued December 12th, 2019. Staff believes these have been properly calculated and recommends the Commission accept the proposed STRIDE surcharges for filing. The representatives of the Engineering Division, Accounting Division, and Telecommunications, Gas and Water Division are available to answer any questions you may have with regard to BGE as well as with regard to WGL, which company has proposed 70 projects, of which 39 have been carried over from 2019. Together, these projects represent 7.45 miles of main replacement and 3,707 services. Approximately 5 transmission programs are also proposed. Again, staff has reviewed the project list and the surcharges and recommends their approval. I have one change to make with regard to WGL's recommendation. We recommend that these be effective January 1, 2019, and we meant 2020.
Thank you. Ms. Garofalo. Does counsel for either utility wish to add anything else?
Good afternoon, Dan Herson for Baltimore Gas and Electric. I don't have a presentation, Your Honor. I'm here to answer questions. I've also brought several folks from our gas shop and Mr. Frayne in our rates department if the commissioners have any specific questions.
Thank you. Mr. Dodge?
John Dodge, once again, on behalf of Washington Gas. I had a grand plan to say Happy Kwanzaa, and, but I'll just go with what we presented in our papers.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just comment on the BG&E buck sheet and address BG&E directly. There is a long list of low-pressure projects here that is going to be initiated in 2020. And I can't tell you how pleasing it was for me to read this list of low-pressure mains and low-pressure services that are going to be replaced in next year's program year. This is the first written evidence, I think, that this commissioner has seen that we're prioritizing the replacement of this stuff. We've always been told, well, it's being done kind of when that group class gets done, but I think this is a demonstration that shows over 200,000, I think 230,000 when I did a quick add up of feet of low pressure main being replaced, thousands of services in the next year, and that's important. We just sat through a very painful hearing last night on a gas explosion. Mr. Dodge was there with us, and it was painful to hear that. And we know what happened in Massachusetts, and I think that this low pressure main represents a real and present danger in our local distribution systems, and to see it replaced with this degree of attention is very pleasing to me, and I wanted to thank and commend BG&E for helping staff in their write-up for culling this out and showing this to the commission, because I think it's very important in terms of policy in the state of Maryland that we replace this main. So thanks to BG&E, thanks to staff.
Additional comments or questions? Commissioner Herman?
Mr. Herson, your comments mentioned that you are still working on the work hours. Do you have an update on the work hours?
Yes, I do have an update I can provide you. We actually met with the city officials yesterday. I attended that meeting. The director of the Department of Transportation was present. Right now, the extended work hours, which just to level set, would be 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. as opposed to 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. are in force through mid-February. They were not yesterday willing to give us a hard extension on that, but they did say we have no reason to think that can't continue, and from our side of the table, we don't see any reason why it can't continue either. Both sides are working well with each other. We're not aware of any issues that they're having with us, and vice versa with them. They just want to continue to monitor our progress and our work practices before they make extensions on it. So we're going to reconvene with them at the end of January. So, it's our hope that we will get an extension on that. They're also accommodating us with other work hour extensions on a project-by-project basis. So you might see a specific project extended to weekend hours, or they might extend the 8 to 4:30 even more for a particular project. My sense from the meeting yesterday is they wanted to get more details on specific projects, including specific blocks, streets, addresses, who's going to be doing the work, which contractor, that sort of thing. So we did provide them with additional information akin to what we're providing the commission and stakeholders as part of our annual filing. They seem pretty pleased with what we gave them. We're going to continue to provide that information to them. So I would say all in all, it was a positive meeting. I feel very optimistic that although we haven't totally solved that issue, that we're working in good faith with them moving forward, and I don't have any reason to think that we can't work it out.
Thank you.
Well, these lists and staff's box sheet demonstrate that the utilities are focusing their time and attention on those services and lines that are in most need of attention. So we appreciate the hard work of our staff and your staff in getting this to us on time. With that, is there a motion on these two items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, for items number 26 and 27, I move that we approve the 2020 STRIDE project lists for both BGE and WGL and accept the proposed surcharges to be effective January 1st, 2020.
Thank you. All in favor? The motions are approved. Thank you for sitting through this relatively long meeting today. Have a happy holiday and a happy new year.